Hello and welcome everyone to yet another new thing on my increasingly aimless YouTube channel. So basically, recently I've seen quite a few new films. On this channel I've always wanted some sort of vessel to talk about films, and not only do I feel like this is a good film to start talking about films with, also I'm going to make this series ultra casual, not give any scores or formal reviews, because I don't really have the time to do that in the same way as my game reviews right now, or even my album reviews really. So this is just going to be a super off-the-cuff, almost like solo podcast series where I talk about new films. And right off the bat, like I said, we have a pretty perfect one to start with, because not only am I a reasonably big horror fan, but also this is just a very interesting film to talk about. So first things first, before I say anything about the film, I want to say that I think it's absolutely worth watching because it's incredibly unique. If you enjoy horror and you want to see something kind of a little bit outside of the norm, a little bit unusual, and also something that can't, I struggle to see how this could exist in under any other circumstances, then you should definitely check this out because it definitely ticks all of those boxes, and I think you're going to have a super interesting time, regardless of whether you like or hate it. So with that all out of the way, this is a new film by director James Wan, who's done he made the first Saw, or directed the first Saw film. He did the Conjuring and Insidious series, and also most recently he did Aquaman for DC. So Malignant is him basically going back to his horror roots to some extent, and essentially what this film is, or at least what it feels like to me, is James Wan paying homage to some extent to a whole bunch of different genres that I think he has a clear appreciation for. So it sort of starts out in a very standard kind of haunted house, supernatural horror sense. You essentially have this woman who's living in a house with her abusive boyfriend. She gets her head cracked against the wall, and then from that point onwards, there's kind of strange, sort of maybe supernatural things happening. You're not entirely sure for the first third of the film what's going on. But at some point she starts seeing murders in a kind of what happens essentially, it almost looks like she gets transported to another world in a way, and everything around her sort of melts, and then a new room rematerializes out of the ground, and then she'll witness some kind of murder. But at some point during the film, she goes to the police and basically gives this information up so they can figure out who's been murdered and try and investigate the case, and they all assume she's psychic. But while this is happening, you also have the sister character who essentially goes and looks up her medical records and discovers that when she was younger, she had a conjoined twin. And the way these two storylines end up converging is that the woman who is having these out-of-body experiences is suddenly under suspicion from the police. They think that she's the one causing the murders or committing the murders in some way, because what ends up happening is a woman that gets kidnapped by the monster during the film ends up falling through her roof, which is so bizarre while the police are there. It's a really strange and kind of funny moment. So they obviously suspect her after a point, but what ends up being the case, and this is revealed via the sister discovering some VHS tapes from the place that she investigated for the medical records, what ends up happening is that you find out the twin is kind of a conjoined twin that happens to be, they essentially put the conjoined twin in the brain of this woman. So what ends up happening is you discover that after the boyfriend hit the woman's head against the wall, it ends up waking up the conjoined twin in the back of her head. And this conjoined twin essentially just takes control of this woman's body and controls her literally backwards in what is perhaps the goofiest way possible. And once this is revealed, the entire film switches into this action-packed, ultra campy, John Wick-esque action film, and it's honestly just an absolutely wild ride from this point out, but it does take a little while to get there. Now, the thing I'm torn about on this film, because conceptually, I actually think it's quite clever. I think it's a very good bait and switch. I think it's intentional. It's kind of hard to say whether it's supposed to be as comedic as it ends up being, but it has a similar vibe to kind of a B horror movie from the 80s, right? It's just got this very strange monster that's ultra goofy, and I think the film doesn't take it too seriously. But the thing that's unique about this film is it doesn't give that information up early at all. Essentially, for the first like hour of the film, it doesn't seem that campy. It seems very self-serious, and then over time, I think slowly the more silly elements get revealed, and until you have this just bombastic ending, and it's an absolute riot. I think the best example of a midway point is there's a scene where one of the police officers is chasing the monster. He managed to find him. I can't remember exactly why, but he ends up chasing him for ages, kind of firing at him. And they have this incredibly long chase scene where you have the monster, while controlling this human body, but in reverse, Tarzan, like, parkouring down a set of stairs, running backwards in the goofiest way possible, and then, you know, going underground into this kind of, like, old world version of the city. Tarzan swinging through, you know, wooden pallets and stuff like that. It's just so... It's so goofy, but it's difficult to know whether it was meant to be as goofy as it was, and I think that's what this film kind of hinges on a little bit. It's difficult to know, again, how intentional all of this is, I guess is the best way to put it. But regardless of all that, I guess I'll just list out a couple of things that I thought were done actually really well, and a couple of the things that I'm less sure of. So this had a huge budget. This thing had a $40 million budget, which is just insane for the kind of film it is. It's honestly, like, it's difficult to imagine this ever happening outside of this very unique situation where someone made a fuck ton of money for a studio and has this passion for kind of these strange horror films of the past, I guess. But regardless, due to that budget, it actually does have really good lighting, a lot of great set design. I've really liked a lot of the camera work. Some of it was ultra creative, especially during the action scenes. But some of the other elements are just a little odd. So, like, you have some strangely, I guess, some of the acting just isn't particularly good, but it's, again, difficult to know whether it was intentional. If it was during entirely the back half of the film, then you could say, okay, sure, it knows what it is now. But it's kind of... Like, the sister character shows up throughout the whole film, even the parts where it's still kind of tricking people, I think, into being spooky. You have the sister character who kind of delivers these very over-the-top, kind of like, very blunt expository lines that just seem so jarring in contrast to what the rest of the film is trying to do at this point. So again, it's just difficult to know whether that acting was in there intentionally or not. But either way, I do think on a rewatch it will be A, slightly more clear, and B, I think there'll be more things you pick up on that make it more obviously schlock by this point. So for example, again, in the first half of the film, it's mostly played fairly serious and fairly straight-faced, but there are a couple hints, I think. So the opening scene is a huge one. It's just ultra schlocky and gives you a kind of a little bit of a teaser as to where the film's going to go. But even after that point, you have moments where, like, a car gets parked really, really close to a cliff edge. You have, like I said, the chase scene earlier. You have the sister showing up in, like, a fairy outfit at the hospital because she came back from her acting job or something. Like, it's so strange. And I do think, again, going back and rewatching it will make the tone clearer. But I maintain, if you haven't seen this film and you've listened to everything I've had to say, unfortunately, you have spoiled it a bit for yourself. But I still think it's very difficult to ruin the experience of this film because it is just one hell of a ride. And I would highly recommend it regardless. But to wrap up, I guess I would say that this is a very unique film. I'm incredibly glad I saw it. I'll definitely be catching it a second time. I'm very happy something with this higher budget like this got made. I have absolutely no idea how quote-unquote good I would say it is. I guess on a rewatch, depending on how self-serious versus how kind of nudge-nudge wink at the camera is, I guess that will sway my opinion. But regardless, like I said, I think this is a very unique film. I think it's somewhat clever in what I think it's trying to do. I maintain, I do think it probably is going to be sillier in the first half. now that I know where it goes. I think there'll be just enough to kind of keep you going. The only real question is, does it take too long to get to the full-on, like, schlock moments? And that, I have no idea. I'll just have to wait for a rewatch. But yeah, regardless, highly recommend this one. Go check it out. You'll have an absolute blast. I can't imagine what watching this in a cinema full of people who have no idea what's going to happen would be like. I might honestly go and do it at some point, because I believe it's still in theaters right now. But yeah, cheers for watching, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I guess I'll do some more in the future. Maybe I'll use more of a script, or maybe I'll just be completely off the cuff like this time. I have no idea. But regardless, cheers for watching, and I'll see you around.